Today we review the exam Tanium Certified Administrator. Welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone, and welcome to this installment of the Tanium Certification Series. Hopefully you've had a chance to check out the overview and the TCO, and today we're going to look at the next level cert, the Tanium Certified Administrator, the TCA. And just like this whole series, what I've done is I've found an expert in Tanium somewhere that had something to do with making these exams happen, and I've invited them to give you the inside scoop. And so today is no different. What you're going to do today is you're going to get to meet, you probably have met Mason already. He had a really popular video called Mastering Interact that got a lot of attention here on the Tanium YouTube channel. A lot of people learned how to get started with Tanium from that. So Mason, welcome back to the show. For those who haven't met you yet, could you give us a little bit of an intro?
Thanks for having me, Ashley. Always happy to be here. These are always a fun thing to do. For those who don't know me, my name is Mason Dillon. I am currently a instructional designer with Tanium, which means I'll write quite a bit of our training content. I've also been a field TAM working with some of our customers. I have done customer training, quite a bit of training actually. I did that as a dedicated role for about a year, still pick up some training here and there to keep my skills sharp. And in general, just kind of an all-round IT guy. I've done support desk work. I've done, system administration, network engineering. If there's a role in IT, I've probably held it or at least done it as a side gig at some point in my career.
And that's the fun when you get to work with people from Tanium. There's some people with some really deep backgrounds. So Mason, you're perfect for this show today again. So we're talking about the TCA exam. What was your role in creating the exam?
Yeah, so for the TCA, I actually helped write an initial review of the questions. So if you run into one there and you just feel really stumped, you're like, man, this is a terrible question. That was somebody else. But all the really good ones that you're like, man, that was a good question. I probably wrote those.
All right, there we go. Yeah, because as many years as I've been taking exams, there's always one or two questions. Like I've studied and I've done it hands-on. There's always there's a couple questions you're like, what are they really going for here? Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
good to know that this is kind of done by consensus and we get some. And I also heard somebody said that all answers, like in the multiple choice, are actual valid answers to some kind of question. Maybe not this one. They're not like made up stuff. Is that right?
Mm, to an extent. So sometimes we'll make up a little bit of what's there to give a little variety. So for example, if it's a DNS question, I may allude to DNS being, oh Lord, now I'm struggling. Gonna come up with something. I may allude to DNS with a bogus name, right? Instead of domain name system, I may call it, David's nefarious system or something weird, right? But when those are done, they're usually fairly obvious as long as you have a little bit of background in the IT world, right? So nothing's done in an attempt to just completely trip you up. I will say that.
Yeah, so that I appreciate that, really do, because sometimes back in the day there were some very obvious things to throw us off the trail, but that's good that this is mostly plausible here. So, where can people go to get started?
Yeah. So the first thing you're going to want to do is start on the tanium.com website, which I have up on the screen now. Go to customers and become an expert. Click on Tanium Learning. If we scroll down a bit, first I'll point out we do have quite a bit of information. We've got our full course catalog. We've got descriptions of all of our training. We also have here, Getting Certified, a link to a page that has all the information about our certifications on it. And one of the main things you're going to want to look at, today we're talking about Tanium Certified Administrator. You're going to want to look at the exam guide for the certification you're getting ready to take. This is going to give you a bit of an outline of what type of knowledge the exam is testing for, but it's also going to give you an exact blueprint of percentages and the types of things that may be on the exam. So it's very important to come here and look at this and make sure you're kind of familiar with what the blueprint is, what's expected.
So, as with most of these exams, it's kind of a combo between hands-on experience and training. So I know you write some of our courses, and maybe
Mhm.
right up front, could you just tell us what are some of the courses that are relevant for this exam?
For the Tanium Certified Administrator, first you do have to be a TCO or a Tanium Certified Operator. The knowledge you gained while prepping for that exam is absolutely relevant to the TCA. To that end, if you felt like you needed to take a refresher on that, maybe you haven't taken the TCO for a year and a half, getting close to 2 years, and you want to refresh on that, I would recommend the Getting Started with Tanium class. It's one of our shorter classes, is a live instructor class. You can complete it in a day. If you do it self-paced, it's probably about 4 hours of content. And it's going to cover a lot of the fundamental Tanium stuff you need to know, particularly how to filter for data within Tanium. That's going to be very important, as we'll discuss for some of these administrative tasks we're going to do. The course that is part of the actual learning path for the TCA is the Tanium Administrator 2.0 course. That's going to cover the actual administrative functions, building on that knowledge you got from the TCO to enable you to go manage and troubleshoot a Tanium installation.
Yeah, we know that there's a lot to that, and I always have to ask this question, particularly when it comes to administration. Is there, because I know a lot of people are going to want to know, is there any difference between on-prem and cloud with regard to the exam?
As far as the exam is concerned, no. Everything on the exam is based on administrative tasks that a Tanium Cloud customer would need to know. We don't cover any of the things that are very specific to hosting your own hardware or having to manage the Tanium operating system that we call TANOS underneath that. None of that's covered on the exam. If you're an on-prem customer, we do have some materials to help you with that and help you study and train for those extra features, but they are not included on our exam.
Okay. So I've got a course, Tanium Administrator 2.0. I'm guessing that's probably related to the server version in the courseware.
Actually, it's just the second build of the Tanium administration class. There was such a big difference between the old Tanium Administrator 1.0, if you will, and the rebuild we did about a year or so ago, that we felt it was worth denoting the 2.0 difference. And honestly, we're getting ready to rebuild the class again, and we'll probably do the same thing.
Well, I got an email the other day that said my TCA would be expiring at CONVERGE time this year because I passed it at CONVERGE a couple years ago. And I guess it's what, a
Yeah,
2 year window on
two
these? Is that
years
right?
on these. That is correct.
Okay, so I've got to reschedule my TCA. So I am particularly personally vested in this video today because I need you to tell me what's changed, what I need to make sure I focus on.
Absolutely. Let's make sure we get you off on the right track. To that point, the first thing I actually want to talk about, let's scroll back up a little bit. We have a phrase here that I want to make sure we all kind of understand what it means for this specific exam. So we're saying the next level certification is for people interested in enhancing their Tanium certification. And specifically, we want people who can demonstrate the ability to operationalize, maintain, and troubleshoot the platform. And to your point about on-prem versus cloud, in a Tanium cloud environment. So I want to take a few minutes and break down what that means. It may seem obvious, but let's really drill into it for this exam specifically. What are some of the things you need to know? So when I say operationalize, or when we have operationalize here, what we're talking about is the ability to take a default install of Tanium. So as a Tanium Cloud customer, you just wrote the first check and we've cut your license and your environment spun up and you're logging in for the first time. We do have a lot of default configs that helps get Tanium running for you, but you still have to get it specific to your environment, right? You have to set up your modules for your use cases, and we want to make sure you know how to do that. Some specific tasks you're going to need to be able to do are things like, how do you set up users and user groups within Tanium? How do I pair a user to the SAML integration I've got, right? Maybe I'm using Okta or one of the other SAML providers out there. How do I get that stuff linked up? So you're going to need to know how to do that. One of the things that Tanium allows you to do that I think is really interesting and opens up a lot of flexibility and a lot of ability to really make sure somebody has the minimum permission set to do their job is alternate personas. So actually, you may log in and your day-to-day job, you're a patch administrator. So you have access to all Windows machines, but only Windows machines, and you have access to the patch module. But when your counterpart goes on vacation, it may become time for you to also be able to generate some reporting about Linux machines. So we can give you an alternate persona that gives you access to Linux machines, but not the ability to patch them or modify the patch setup, just the ability to gather data, view the reports, send the reports off to management, whatever you need to do, right? So we've got that concept, and you're going to want to be familiar with how to build different personas and how to assign them either to users or to user groups as needed.
And if we scroll down, is that all called out in the bullets here?
Yep, that kind of stuff is all going to be down here. Most of what I'm talking about now would be under initial configuration.
Yeah, I'm thinking just all the years of
User
deploying
groups.
Tanium as a TAM, like configuring your subnets, for example, for isolation, for VPN is like a really common thing. Stuff like that.
Yeah, that's some stuff that's worth talking about too. So there's this whole kind of bigger topic, the way I look at it, of managing Tanium from a network standpoint. You mentioned isolated subnets. We have intentional subnets. We have separated subnets. So what does all that mean? If you're a network person, you know this pretty intimately. If not, you may not know the networking part as well, but you'll want to understand how Tanium sits on top of it. A standard network, a standard Class C network, which is usually how an environment is carved up, has about 254 IP addresses in a subnet. Tanium communicates within subnets, so that means Tanium's going to by default look to peer up to 254 endpoints together in a single linear chain. However, for a really small remote office, you may not want to waste that many IP addresses on that office. You can do what's called subnetting. You can cut a subnet in half and have 128 in each, or you can break it down smaller than that. When that's happening, you want to tell Tanium about that. Your network admin can give you the information you need, but you need to know what IP address range they're using and how they're subnetting it, what they're carving it into. You'll key that into Tanium, and then Tanium knows, hey, over here in this office, this small subset of endpoints is located in New York City. I'm going to let them peer together. But these others that by default might be in the same subnet, we've subnetted that out and we've given that to an office down in Dallas, Texas. We don't want those two offices talking to each other. That's wasting a lot of WAN bandwidth, which is at a premium in any environment. And so it's just one of the ways we can say, hey, look, those are over there. These are over here. Don't connect them via linear chain. They need to stay their own chain. It's a
I'd
very
love
important
to go
topic to
into the
understand.
console. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'd love to go see this in the console because this is like core everyday configuration. People have got to know how to do this.
Yeah, so let's, here in the console, I'm going to actually take a moment before we get there, take a little roundabout way, if you will, the scenic route to get there. One of the things I want to call out for the administration exam, there's two major sections over here. You're going to want to make sure you're familiar with everything underneath them. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about, because we won't really go to it until later, is shared services. There are a number of items under this shared services menu that as an administrator, you're going to want to know about, either because you're going to have to set things up inside of there, or they're going to be very useful in troubleshooting Tanium as a whole. And we'll come back to this one later. The other one is here, the administration menu, or these gears. Everything under here is considered an administrative function. Some other people may share some of these permissions with you. For example, client status is one that's often handed out to more than just the admin. But as an administrator, you need to be familiar with all of these various menus and what you can do under there when you would want to go make changes. That's going to be very important for this exam.
So I see under configuration over there, subnets. That's what we were just talking about.
Yep, the one we were just talking about, subnets. And so separated subnets is here at the top. If you're familiar with networks, you're going to notice right away this is a CIDR notation. Again, if you don't know this, we're not testing deep network knowledge for you on this exam. Your network administrator can give you the details you need. What you need to know is how to go in here and put in a new subnet. And it's pretty easy. Again, your network administrator is going to tell you what you need. So maybe it's 10.10.10.0/24. That's all you'd type in. At this point, anything within that subnet is going to be its own little subnet within Tanium. We're not going to peer outside of this. If I change this to 25, might seem a little backwards. Again, if you're not familiar, a bigger CIDR number here means a smaller grouping of endpoints. we're going to cut that in half, and there would be about 128 endpoints that would be potentially allowed inside of that linear chain.
Yeah, and that's typically what
26.
we see here is
Yeah.
subnetting, not supernetting. So if we're
Yeah.
defaulting to a /24, typically the only things you're going to need to put in here would be something bigger than a 24. Yeah.
Yeah. 25 and 26, probably the most common, but in theory, you could go up as high as 28 and still have valid ranges that would have clients that could peer there. So,
Mm-hmm.
but again, I don't want you stressing over these for the exam. Actually, when you get ready to take it, your network admin will be able to tell you what details are here. You just need to know when to go in and key them in and when to ask your network admin and what to ask your network admin for. So again, anytime you're going smaller than a standard class C, we want to tell Tanium about it.
Good. And then isolated, we've got it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's your VPN typically, right?
Yeah,
Other
so
cases. So
isolated literally means any client that falls within the range we've given, they're never going to talk to each other. We're going to pretend that they're off in a bubble completely by themselves, even if they're literally in the same exact rack in your data center with the same, subnetting. We're still going to treat them differently. Now, there's a few reasons. You bring up the most common one there, and that's your VPN, right? So imagine you've got a VPN concentrator and you've got all these work from home employees. What we don't want is Tanium trying to peer from Bob's house to your corporate office where their concentrator is, turning right back around and going back out the concentrator across that same WAN link out to the internet to get to Jane's house and try to peer with her machine. It's inefficient. And even if it works, it just burns up a lot of bandwidth unnecessarily. So we would take all of the IP addresses that that concentrator can give out, put that in here as an isolated subnet. And then basically we're telling Tanium, don't peer any of these. These are people who are work from home, or these are, a remote employee who's out in the field, or whatever else the case may be. We don't want these machines trying to peer with each other.
all right, I'm going to set you up now. How can I find out whether machines are peering? I can do it in Interact, but there's another admin console.
Absolutely. And this is perhaps one of the most important day-to-day options you're going to want to use as an administrator. And this gets over into the maintain. Let's keep the Tanium environment running healthy. We're going to use client status. Now, by default, what client status is going to show us are all of the machines that have communicated with the Tanium server in the past 5 minutes. Now, in this environment, I've got 204 machines that have communicated recently. And over here is where I can see what my interval is. Now, I can change this to be a certain number of seconds, minutes, hours, whatever, or I can turn that off and see a full 30-day history. Now, for what you were asking about, how can I tell if a client is peering? There's a few ways, but the easiest at-a-glance way is to look here in the direction column at this icon. If the icon has arrows pointing in and out on both sides, it's got peers on both sides of it, and they are actively talking and communicating. If I have a circle with just an arrow pointing up, this endpoint is isolated for some reason. It has no peers. It's only talking to the Tanium server. And this one down here, if I have arrows going one direction and an arrow going up, no arrows going out the other direction, this is what we'd refer to as a leader, a forward or backwards leader. It is part of a linear chain, but it is also maintaining a persistent connection with the server because it's either the highest IP address or the lowest IP address in that subnet. Now, you will occasionally see a few other symbols. Very rarely we can see a circle with nothing else going on. Honestly, it probably means this machine just came online, and while it's talked to Tanium, it's not officially part of any linear chain yet. It's literally told Tanium, I'm here, but I'm waiting on you to tell me what to do. Do I only talk to you? Do I talk to Bob's PC? Right, we're in a state of waiting. You can also see an X. I'm going to get down so that we see just some X's here. Oh, this is the most healthy Tanium environment I've ever been in, Ashley. We have no endpoints that are blocked, and I can't believe that.
It's a wonderful day in the neighborhood. Yep.
It is.
Everybody's
it is. Good. So let's talk about it, though. What you would see if an endpoint was blocked is inside the circle, you would see an X, like just literally an X. What that means is that the machine has registered with Tanium and it's talked to it. And again, by default, if we had left this checked, that would be machines who have actively talked in the last 5 minutes or so. But for some reason, they cannot communicate with their peers, or they can't send data back to the Tanium server, right? Like that communication is one way. This very often means a local firewall issue. In the case of getting to the server, it could be like your corporate firewall at the edge of the network or something like that that's allowing traffic in one direction but not the other. I've seen situations where packet filtering may allow the client to register, but it stomps on the traffic we send out that's part of like question traffic. But something is interfering with traffic. And while the client is telling the server it's there, it's not doing much more. And those are ones we definitely want to go in and troubleshoot and figure out what's going on.
And part of the exam is troubleshooting.
It absolutely is.
And so if we scroll to the right, there's some other columns here that I think will be valuable for folks to see, particularly that last registration time.
Yeah. So again, right now I've got it set to just the last 5 minutes. Uncheck this and sort. You can see we've got stuff going. We're not going back quite a month in this environment, but I've got a few machines that are like a week old here showing up, or a little over a week old since they registered last. Now, in any sizable production environment, you're going to see this, Ashley, especially if it's like early on a Monday morning, people have been gone over the weekend, they shut their machine down, disconnected from the network, they haven't made it back in the office yet. This is normal. What I want you as an administrator to know, and what we're going to test on, is your ability to determine what's normal for your environment and what's not normal for your environment. So for example, if I come in every Monday morning at 10 a.m., I check client status and I look at my 30-day count, meaning I uncheck this box, and I always have 400 endpoints, or let's go for something a little bigger. Let's go for 40,000 endpoints. If I come in one Monday and I've only got 20,000 endpoints connected when I check it, that's not normal for my environment. That's a change. Something has happened, and I need to start trying to figure out what. Now, it could be that it's a holiday, right? It's Memorial Day and everybody took off on Monday. Okay, as long as we come back in on Tuesday and the numbers return to normal, that's a perfectly valid explanation. But if it's not a holiday and I've lost half my endpoints, my gut tells me somebody made a network change somewhere and half my environment is no longer able to get out to my cloud server and make a connection to Tanium, right? And so I'm going to start chasing that down. Now, the good thing is we have other information here that can help. Look at your IP addresses, right? You've got your local address. This is the network location, we call it from client. This is literally the IP assigned to that endpoint. We've also got the network location from the server. So if these things are NATed, we'll be able to see what the NAT address is. So if you know you always have a 64 something NAT for your Houston office and a 96 something NAT coming out of your Raleigh-Durham office, and all you see are 64 something IP addresses, something's up at Raleigh-Durham, right? Maybe the site went down. Maybe, again, somebody made a firewall change. But these are the kind of things where I'm going to look regularly. I want to know what's normal so that when something isn't normal, I can tell what's not normal, and it's going to guide me in my troubleshooting and figuring things out and save me a lot of time.
Mason, the way you described that sounds like you've lived that once or twice.
Oh, once or twice, yes. I've seen entire offices go offline. I've seen subnets with a little firewall change take a whole group of subnets offline, but maybe not an entire office. Yeah, I've seen a lot in my years with Tanium. So
this is a good place maybe to bridge over to, okay, let's say we've got a machine that's actually connected and peering, but something else is going on. How would I get the logs off that machine?
absolutely. So, all right. So Ashley, what we're going to do is under shared services, we have client management. And client management gives us a few things. This is our ability to deploy clients. We can upgrade clients. We can even modify client settings. But for your question, the most important thing here is right here under health, we can do what's called a direct connect. Now, I can also go up here to this menu. There's a few ways to get here. But what I ultimately want to do is connect to a specific client. All right, so I'm going to connect to Aiken Win11 EP2. So I type in Win, it shows up, I click on it, we make a direct connection. Now, I get a lot of information specific to this client, which can be helpful. I can figure out things like the IP address, what port it's using, make sure it's default, what zone server it's connected to. I can look at some configuration settings. If there's anything non-standard, I can see that. But most importantly, I can go to the logs tab here. Now, what this is going to do, as soon as I made this direct connect and flip over, the Tanium client on this endpoint immediately parsed its install directory looking for logs. And now all of those logs are listed here. I point that out because some modules have their own logs, and some of those logs will show up here depending on where they're stored. So you may see more or less logs for a particular endpoint, and that's totally normal. Now, the primary log we would look at if you say, well, it's just like a Tanium communication problem or the Tanium client isn't doing something correctly, is just what we call the log 0 right here. When I click on that, this direct connection is going to pull the content of that text file back to the console, and then this is browsable. This is searchable. So if I want to specifically look for the word error, I can do that. I've got 59 matches. If I scroll through here, the word error is now highlighted, and this yellow on black makes it very easy, stands out very quickly. I can also filter down to where just the lines that have that match on them are thrown here, and then I can start looking at them. All right, so I've got a couple of oddballs here that don't line up, but everything else on this endpoint is crypt acquired context fail. Now, in this case, there's a few things that could be, but it looks like since we were trying to run an active script, that something in that script didn't pass our cryptographic check, and we probably refused to fire that script. So if I'm looking at this, I'm probably looking at something like an action that won't run or a sensor that's not returning details correctly. I'm kind of suspicious what's going on in the endpoint related to that. You can see here, failed to create process for all these enhanced tags. Something about that action is failing. If it's a single endpoint, again, I'm looking at things like AV or other things that could stop a script from running. If I see this across the board on all my endpoints, I'm concerned that somehow this script and the action has actually gotten modified or corrupted somehow. And I'm looking to either re-import this action, recreate it if it's a custom action or something like that.
Well, Mason, this is one of my favorite pieces of Tanium administration, just the ability we've given here. Yeah, go ahead and hit actions and gather real quick because I know we're running short on time. There's so much on this exam. We're just simply not able to teach you everything in this quick overview, right? And this isn't even an overview, what we're doing in this video here, but just to give you an idea of some of the things you might expect to see.
Yeah, so the action tab here is going to give us all of the actions that have run in the past 7 days on this endpoint. And same thing, if I click on one of them, it's going to give me the full log. And now, one of the more important things to know how to do is what we call sometimes a must gather, an endpoint must gather, or you may hear some variations of that depending on who you're talking to. But this is ultimately your ability to say, I want to grab all of the logs and configuration files off of an endpoint related to whatever. And then that's going to come down as a zip file that I can hand off to my TAM or to the support center or to an ESO that may work with me, partners I'm working with, and give them all the information. So by default, the All tab is selected. And if I hit this on a fully deployed endpoint like this one is, it probably takes about 15 minutes to gather everything, zip it up, and make it ready to download. Another few minutes to download, depending on just how big that file ends up being. For a more normal deployment where you're only going to have a handful of modules, these things literally take a couple of minutes to generate and download. And then you can get that off, attach it to your support case, and you've got all of the relevant logs, config files, if needed, databases that may have some configs in them, all right there in a single zip file you can give to the support desk.
And that really takes us to the heart of this exam, right? Operationalize, maintain, troubleshoot. And then when you need a get out of jail free card, you can throw it over to support@tanium.com, right? With our heroes over there. Okay.
Absolutely. Amazing team. Amazing team. And being able to help them along is just going to help you along as well.
Well, Mason, I know we've just barely scratched the surface. We've looked at the exam blueprint. And because I know you talk to people who take the exam on a regular basis, and I'm going to be taking this very soon, what kind of closing tips would you have for somebody who needs to take this exam?
Yeah, so if this is your first time, so sorry, not you for this comment, Ashley, but for everybody else, we talk about 2 years of experience, but I want to be clear. We want 2 years of almost any kind of platform experience. Like if you've done any form of enterprise management of this type, you're going to start to have the concepts down, right? You're going to understand what it means to figure out a user's minimum permissions. You understand RBAC, and you probably have started to learn some stuff about networking, even if that's not your forte. You still want the knowledge from the Tanium Certified Operator underneath that, though. You need to understand how to use Tanium, how to create filters for questions. That translates over literally click for click to creating filters for making computer groups, for making custom deployments and things of that nature. Now, for somebody who's looking to say re-up their certification, We really haven't changed this exam a lot in the past 2 years. A few things have been updated. So when you get to the simulation section, this is going to look more modern. It's not going to look like the console from 2 years ago. But Tanium administration has not changed a ton. There are a couple of quick things I would call out that you may not have known about before. Under shared services, if you go down here to endpoint configuration, this has become a pretty important screen for troubleshooting. When you create a configuration in a module, let's say you go into patch and you create a patch list and a deployment, and now 40 endpoints should be installing these 3 patches. What really happens on the back end of Tanium is that becomes a configuration and endpoint configuration. When a computer registers, it tells the Tanium server enough to determine which configuration applies to it. And then this ECF, as we sometimes call it, or the endpoint configuration tool, pushes that configuration down to the endpoint so the endpoint can apply it. If there's a failure point where an endpoint is just not getting the configuration to do what it needs from a module, this is where you're going to go start troubleshooting. You can check the installed tools here, which will show you all of the various modules, and it gives some overview data such as have things deployed correctly. Red is bad. Red is some form of an error message you'd want to look into, and you can drill into all of these details. But you can also see the actual individual configs, what they're configured like, and whether or not they've been deployed successfully. So if an endpoint isn't doing what the module setup says it should, this is your main place to stop and start to try and figure out what's going on. This is going to have so much data for you.
Well, Mason, this has been a wonderful teaser on the TCA exam. Thank you. I know this will help me as I get ready to take it again. And so for those of you out there who have maybe taken your TCO and it's been a while, just as a bonus, when you take the TCA, it will automatically renew your TCO cert. So hopefully you should only ever have to take the TCO once, because when you take those other more advanced exams, it'll automatically renew.
Absolutely.
And I hope to see you in the test center at CONVERGE. Would love to make a video about your certification journey. We've done that the last few years at CONVERGE in person. This year's Orlando in November. Looking forward to that. So Mason, thanks again for this tour of operationalizing, maintaining, and troubleshooting Tanium with the Tanium Certified Administrator exam. And as always, folks, you know there are some links in the show notes below that include some other relevant exam topics like RBAC and that Mastering Interact that Mason did. There's a lot of other topics here. Even cloud client deployment, maybe not as much for this exam, but it's good to watch some of these other topics as well over the last few years here on the show that will also prep you on these core exam topics. So with that, that wraps up today's episode of Tanium Tech Talks. And until next time, go Tanium.